Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Philosophy with Aaron Lane. Today, we're going to be talking about materialism. We'll be taking a deep dive into the material approach to consciousness. Last episode, we talked about what consciousness is, some characteristics of consciousness, some different approaches when it comes to explaining why consciousness is and how it arises. So today we're talking about materialism. I guess this would be the most prominent approach nowadays, the most popular approach. So it only makes sense we start off with it. So standard approach we always take with these things is we dissect it into three sections. The first section would be what the thing itself is. So we'll be talking about what materialism itself is, why it is, why you would want to believe in it, and how it then, if this approach would be correct, how it would affect you. So first off, let's talk about what materialism itself even is. So it's a form of monism. What monism means in the approach to consciousness is that one substance is everything. The direct opposite of monism would be substantial dualism. So what substantial dualism is it's saying that consciousness, and maybe you can believe like the soul, you can call it the soul, that consciousness and the material world are two different substances. They somehow communicate. There's this whole philosophical problem, the body mind problem. How does a whole different substance communicate with something that's for a whole different world? Now, monism explains it very well. It says that obviously it communicates because it's still material, like consciousness is still physical matter. It doesn't matter if it's electric or whatever else, it's still in the physical material world. Now, the direct opposite form of materialism, not in the form that it's not a monism, it would still be a monism, but that would be idealism. Now, idealism is still a form of monism, but it doesn't say that everything is physical matter. It doesn't put the physical matter above the soul experience of the consciousness. It actually goes the opposite way. It says that everything is just illusion of the consciousness, you would say. That the physical material is just a projection of how the inner consciousness works. So an idealist would say, okay, so none of this is real. The reason why you see a brain is that it's some kind of inner projection of how the mind works. But materialism is always saying, no, this is completely real. And yeah, so it's very difficult to argue between these two. We'll be trying to go against idealism in this video, trying to prove why believing in materialism would be better. And in the future video, in the upcoming video, we will be doing the exact opposite approach, talking about why you should tend more towards idealism. So don't worry, I'm not taking no sides here. I will be giving the proper treatment to each approach eventually, even going into substantial dualism. But in this episode, we go deep into materialism and try and see why you would want to believe in this approach. I'm not telling you to do it, I'm just saying the reasons for believing in this one specifically. And in the upcoming episodes, I will be telling you the reasons to believe in the other approaches to consciousness. So, once again, it's a form of monism. One material thing is everything, everything is physical matter. Matter then is something that makes consciousness emerge out of it and it stays in the material world. There's no other world, nothing else, right? It's just this single world. Now, there's this amazing website called Consciousness Atlas. It's very beautifully made. There's over 300 theories on consciousness and 9 primary approaches. Some of the important ones are the ones that we already mentioned: idealism, dualism, and materialism. Literally, almost half of the approaches are materialistic. It's a very important category, and modern science is just going with the assumption that consciousness is material, and then we try and look at different forms of materialism. So we will be taking a look into different forms of materialism. This is like, I would be more specific. They go all with the assumption that consciousness emerges from physical matter, but there's just different approaches to, I guess, researching this approach. So if we start off with the most simple one, I would say, is some philosophical positions. It's like the first approach to materialism is philosophy. Now, if I were to explain to a 5-year-old what a philosophical position is, is that there's no kind of hard data behind it, but it's also not just pure blind irrational faith. You still have some logical arguments between these positions. Now, what we're trying to answer here is how can physical processes create consciousness? That's the what you would call the hard problem of consciousness. Now, some two huge positions in philosophy when it comes to materialism. The first one is a thing that's very hard to pronounce, but trying my best to not butcher it. I think it's pronounced epiphenomenalism. It's a very it's a very difficult thing to read. Epiphenomenalism. I don't know who thought of that name and just thought it's a good idea. But basically, what this approach means is that conscious states, as they are, you yourself having these conscious moments right now and experiencing, well, that has no causal power. That is just a byproduct of your body, of your biology, of the chemicals in your brain. And we have been able to look at that through science. We know how it all works, how neurons communicate, and yada, yada, yada. And you yourself experiencing this, well, that is just your pure experience. There is no free will. You don't actually, you're no causator. You and it's very tough to say when I say you, am I talking to you or am I talking to your body? I think if epiphenomenalism would be right, the way I see it is that I'm not talking to you specifically, but at the same time I am. And then how do we explain that? Well, you yourself are the identity. That is what you are. And so is me. So my inner subconscious processes are now dealing with this information and communicating it through the microphone to another human. Now, that is you. That is what we call the you because that is your identity. But your experience itself, that would mean that the you is not the consciousness because if it were you, it would have to have the causal power, right? So the real you, the experiencer, the consciousness, is talking to no one and is just listening its body, I guess, experience because it cannot be me talking as the consciousness because if the consciousness has no causal power, then I wouldn't even be able to talk and think and anything. So this just is happening throughout my body, and the consciousness itself, since it has no causal power, is just experiencing this body talking to another body, and that body in itself has a consciousness that is experiencing it as well. Now, my problem with this approach is then why the fuck is there the consciousness in the first place? It's a very interesting approach. Basically, what it's saying is that consciousness has no causal power. That's what you need to remember. Now, another very important position when it comes to materialism in philosophy is eliminative materialism. Now, what this means is that we have these concepts that are purely experienced. It's faith, desire, consciousness. You experience these things. And what eliminative materialism is saying is that eventually all of this will be explained by more accurate neuroscientific descriptions. And you can already see kind of a trend of this happening. You see that you get a spike of happiness, and some person would be able to say that it was a spike of dopamine. Or you see that you're doing some cheap dopamine activity, and we now understand it more and more. And this approach is saying that eventually all of these concepts, like consciousness, it will actually get replaced by more accurate scientific terms. Now, the direct opposite of this would be phenomenology, another difficult word to pronounce, but essentially what it just all means is talking about consciousness itself as it were some primary thing to all the science, because eventually we cannot be sure of the material world. It could all be an illusion, but what we are sure of is our experience. So let's dive deeply into that and explain it from a pure experience perspective as the consciousness, talking about the consciousness itself by using itself as the, let's say, tool instead of using some EEG or whatever you call those neuroscientific tools. It's a very interesting approach as well. So it's not really in the materialism. It's I think quite the opposite. Now another way to at this time more scientifically dissect materialism is the neurobiological approach. Now we will try to skip a little faster throughout the other approaches. There's 10 of them, so let's not make this video 10 hours long. What you just need to know is that what the neurobiological approach is trying to do is it's going into the brain, it sees these neural connections, and it's trying to find the NCC. That would be the neural correlates of consciousness. What it basically means is that it's trying to find the specific networks, as if like you imagine a brain is a city, there's these roads in there, and it's trying to find out which roads the consciousness is on. Now, this approach is way better than any other purely philosophical approach, because even though a philosophical approach has some arguments behind it and it's not purely irrational, this one has some hard science behind it, and it can go deeply into what consciousness is, since it makes more sense. But we haven't really been able to give like a hard answer of this is consciousness exactly. Now, one prominent theory I would like to mention in the neurobiological approach is very similar to epiphenomenalism, and it's the global workspace theory. What it says is that if you imagine you're in a theater and there's all of this stuff happening in the background, right? Like there's all these subconscious processes, and you're sitting in that theater and you're looking at the place. You don't see all the work actors getting into the costumes and getting their makeup on and doing all of the work. What you just see is that one play. That's all you see, and that's kind of the analogy with consciousness. Is that there's all these background processes happening. There's more and more of them compared to the soul play in the theater. And your consciousness is just this one narrow field of it being pushed down into the theater. And I mean, this is irrefutable, right? We have been able to see that when light goes into your eyes, like there's all these processes. Like light goes into your eyes, then it goes into the sensors in the eyes or whatever, then it goes into the brain, and depending on what kind of connections you have in the brain, it connects all these different things. You see a cat, but you see it as an integrated experience. That's the theater play. But in your brain, what really happens is there's multiple things. You see the shadow of the cat, you see the shape of the cat, you see the colors of the cat. Then you connect it with your memory, and you connect it with knowing that this cat is this cat specifically, yada yada yada. So that's what's the whole approach of consciousness as a theater is supposed to be. Next up is a very interesting approach. It's the electromagnetic approach. Now, what this is saying is that you might have heard that neurons they communicate chemically and through electricity. Now, this approach is saying that okay, so but consciousness is integrated and it's not a singular neuron. Since there's billions of neurons, how is it possible that we have an integrated experience of it all together? And we have been able to see that since they communicate with the electricity, there's this kind of, you can imagine it as a cloud above the neurons. This approach is speculating that this kind of cloud of electromagnetic force above the neurons is actually consciousness itself. And it's actually a very hopeful approach in saying that it even has some causal power. There's this thing in electromagnetic fields called apathetic coupling. Now, I've done some research, but I'm still not able to understand how it fully works. But the idea is, I think that neurons communicate through electricity. This creates the electric field, which exists. We have been able to see this with some like special technology. This field genuinely exists. This is not some like made up bullshit. And then this electromagnetic field has some possibility of being able to communicate back into the neurons. If we were consciousness and we were this field, we would then have some causal power. Once again, this theory is it's just going into exploring this as a theory. It's a possible theory. It's not confirmed. So we got to keep that in mind. It's a very interesting theory. Now, next up is the computational theory. This is the first theory, and it can also be with the philosophical approach as well, but this is the first like theory that goes into detail of trying to figure out how consciousness works, but it's claiming a very important thing. It's called a substrate independence. Now let me give you an analogy with the substrate independence. Let's say you're playing chess. This is an amazing analogy. Doesn't matter if you're playing chess with stone figures or wooden or made out of dirt. It doesn't matter. Like you can play chess made out of paper. it doesn't matter. There's this substrate independence, and that is what it means, is that it doesn't matter what it's made of. This is the computational approach is saying, hey, we're looking at consciousness the wrong way. It does not matter what material the system is made of. What matters is that it processes information using certain rules and algorithms. So, this approach is the first approach that's directly saying that we can actually make AI conscious if we give it the proper processes. It has to have these certain rules that it follows. Now, the neurobiological approach is different in this. It's saying that, hey, we can actually make consciousness in the lab, but it would have to have specific neural connections and all of that. Now, this approach is not saying that. It's saying that it has to have all these rules. Now, if we look at some rules, I try to think about what it could be. There can be more about it, but I think what they're trying to get at is that, first of all, you have to have metacognition. It's the inner awareness of its own processes. That's the first thing that AI doesn't have. It's just analyzing data, and even though it can give off the impression of having an identity, of being aware of its own processes, it really is not. So that would have to be the first very important thing for it to have this rule of having specific ways to process information. Another thing that's somehow important to integrate into an AI that could be conscious potentially is an integrated experience. There has to be some kind of a hub, let's call it, that puts all the information into one. It's just kind of like pushes it all together into one integrated experience. And that is your consciousness, right? That is what pretty much your consciousness is. You're aware of your own processes. You can analyze your yourself as a consciousness. You can realize you are conscious. You have an integrated experience. You don't get it all separately unless you have some brain defect. And another thing is a future prediction, and that is also very important. There has to be a predictive simulation of not only the outside world, but you yourself. So, this process, if we were to make some artificial intelligence, and according to this approach, it wouldn't really, it would have the substrate independence. It wouldn't matter what it's made out of. It would only matter that it's following these specific rules. So, metacognition, integrated experience, and future prediction. And one thing that comes to mind is, what about qualia? What about the subjective experience? And would they just arise out of all of this? Or is it something that's also built in the brain and somehow I don't know. Listen, even if these rules were met, that doesn't mean it would automatically have a subjective experience of this. Even with if we made a system and it had inner awareness of its own systems, it would have a hub that integrates all the information. And lastly, it would be a predictive simulation, since that is what our brain is. It's constantly living in the future. You can kind of say it's constantly predicting the future. This doesn't guarantee the fact that if we made such a robot, it would have subjective experience. But maybe it would. We don't really know. Next approach is kind of more biological. It's called homeostatic. Now, you might have heard of homeostasis. What homeostasis is, it's kind of some inner self regulation. It's trying to keep things in the norm. For example, when you go into a sauna and you're sweating, that is kind of a form of homeostasis. Your body is always trying to regulate itself in the ideal it's supposed to be in. It doesn't really exclude. That's why I think a lot of these can intertwine with each other. It doesn't really exclude like the neurobiological approach. It's trying to go more deeply into why consciousness even arose. And it's trying to say that consciousness emerged as a tool for regulation and survival. That is why your brain is constantly predicting future. It is always doing that. You're always trying to predict the future, and it's kind of a form of homeostasis. Think of cognitive inhibition. You're trying to suppress your inner purely irrational processes, and that can also be viewed as some kind of form of self-regulation. You're self-regulating your own brain. So there is a theory that consciousness arose for this, and with the rational part of the brain, I think this is irrefutable also, because inevitably that is what you are doing. Yes, you're keeping the homeostasis of the brain. So it's a very important theory. Now we go into a more debatable, and I think we can even exclude this one from being right. But maybe it is. I don't know. So it's the embodied theory, or also called enactivism. Now, what enactivism is that it's saying that consciousness, it is directly linked to the body. It is always hard linked to the body. It cannot be understood separate to the body. So consciousness, we're doing it wrong. It's not just the brain. It is the brain's interaction with the body and its environment, and that all affects how we perceive. Because it's the structure of our body. Since we are on 2 feet and we learned to grab things this way and do this, and we have some certain capabilities, we know how fast we can run. We know all of that. That is all affecting consciousness, and you cannot view consciousness separately to the body. Now, the reason I don't really like this approach is because when you sleep, well, it's not like, have you ever had a lucid dream where you felt a sensation of your body? I remember literally last night, literally today, I had like a fucking dream where I was like making out with some girl, and I had like a wet dream. And I remember I was like grabbing her ass. Like, that's so fucking strange. Okay, but it's a real story. It's a real story. And I remember I was like grabbing her ass. I could physically feel the material of her clothes in the dream. And what do you say to that, the activism? H, gotcha. So another approach is relational, and this one is also kind of strange. Kind of strange. What it's saying is that consciousness is caused by interaction between organism and the surrounding world. Consciousness, it's not about an internal simulation, but it's about an active interaction with the external world. So this would kind of go into what Husserl said and what we talked about in the last video. It's the intentionality, is that consciousness is always consciousness of something. And this approach is saying that, yes, that is exactly what's happening. Consciousness is actually caused by interaction between the organism and the surrounding world. And I think this kind of makes sense. It's more going into believing. This is the direct approach against idealism. It's saying that this material world is not an internal simulation of consciousness, but it's the exact opposite way. There's this necessity for this material world to exist, and due to that, the consciousness can arise. Now, how would you then argue if someone says that it's just an internal simulation? And it makes sense, because when you sleep, you also simulate the dream, but it feels real. So how can you prove that the material world is real? And eventually we will go into this, but let's just take a look at the three last fields of studying materialism. Another approach is representational. Now, what this approach is saying, it's kind of hard to get your head around. I'll try my best to explain it. It's saying that consciousness are mental representations of the world. So you permanently have this filter on. At least that's the way I understand it. Now, that one is true. Yeah, we have like an evolutionarily built filter. A different organism would see the world a different way. Now, this approach is saying that the brain, it creates inner models of outer things, and your consciousness is just these models. So, these inner mental states, you can either be or not be aware of them. It doesn't really matter. Eventually, it's like you cannot go out of it. It's the same thing with being aware how you see light. You know that it's these waves of light traveling into your eyes, and you can know exactly how it happens. You can know it's these cones in your eyes, and you're seeing specific wavelengths of the light, and you can know the exact details how it happens. You can even know the parts of the brain that register the light and that give it some meaning. It doesn't really fucking matter if you are aware of your own processes or not. You will still be stuck in this one filter. You will still be stuck with this permanent filter, no matter if you know or not. Even maybe thanks to technology, you would be able to see the world differently. Now, as far as I understand, the representational approach is saying is that the brain is actually creating inner models of stuff, and that is what your consciousness is. Now, I'm not sure if this representational approach is also in the idealistic approach. I think it may be. We will see. We will see in the upcoming episode. So the second before the last, the ninth approach to consciousness is the language approach, and this is a very very interesting approach. And I think even though it probably is not right, I really like the idea of it. So let's try and understand what language is. Think about it this way. Your brain is always communicating with you in some form of language. That is why motherfuckers that have schizophrenia, I've already explained this in the last episode, but I will do it again. People that have schizophrenia, they don't get efference copies in their brain. Now, what does this mean? The way your brain communicates with you is that it sends you thoughts, right? Like you probably have figured out this before. Your thoughts are generated randomly. They just pop into your head. You don't really generate your thoughts. If a person has schizophrenia, it sends a thought into his brain, but it doesn't actually send the efference copy into his hearing system in the brain to say that this is your thought. Don't register it as an outside sound. So that's why if a schizophrenic is sitting by himself in a room, it is fucking scary as fuck. He doesn't have the efference copy that says that this is not an outside sound, and the brain registers it as an outer sound. What might be similar to this, just so you get a grasp of it, is when you have dreams or when you're in the hypnagogic state before falling asleep, or whatever they call it, hypnagogia, I think. It's the state of going from being awake to being asleep, but not being asleep just yet. In this state, you can have these kind of auditory hallucinations where you hear kind of like a reverb of stuff your brain has heard throughout the day. It's kind of like if you were swimming all day and you can kind of feel the waves when you're falling asleep. The same things can happen with auditory senses. And you kind of hear stuff as if someone else were saying it to you, but it's just your brain doing it, right? So it's the same with schizophrenia. And what this language form, now we get into it, is that when you really think about it, you're always thinking in language. Your consciousness it is directly tied to language and symbolic thinking. Now the language approach is saying that due to language we can create complex terms, and what's more important, we can create a narrative identity. Now, the narrative identity and self reflection of one's thoughts is actually the ability for consciousness to arise. And when you think about it, you always think about language. If there were no language, you would not be able to even have a narrative identity. You would not even be able to give a narrative of yourself. Even if you are in a meditative state where you purely experience and for a second you have no thoughts, well, eventually you self reflect through language. But I think this meditative state where you for a second don't have no thoughts is a way to disprove this language approach. I think language is very, very tied to consciousness, but I don't think it's the causator of it. But this approach is saying that due to language, you can build a continuous autobiographical self. And it was thanks to eventual development of language that we were able to get this deeper self awareness of not just purely experiencing like an animal does, but of being able to be conscious and have metacognition. So I would say this language approach doesn't really answer well the answer of consciousness just existing by itself. There's something to it about consciousness being more advanced. There are some levels to consciousness. We have already talked about this in the second to last video when we talked about sentience as a scale. And I think of this as consciousness as well, because you know a lot of people around you that don't actually have metacognition. So it has to be a scale, right? It has to be like scalable. And last up, it's the phylogenetic approach. And essentially, what this approach is just trying to get down onto is to figure out if consciousness is an evolutionary mechanism and eventually it arose in evolution. It's trying to find out historically when it started. That's the very important thing. When. It's trying to find out when in evolution did consciousness arise and which organisms gained it and what's the reason for it. Like, since it's an evolutionary mechanism, it has to have some adaptive advantage. So it views consciousness as like an evolutionary innovation. Now, the characteristics of why it would be evolutionarily beneficial is that it will give you better world orientation, better learning, better decision making. So I think this approach as well is seeing consciousness as having some kind of causal power. It's being better for the organism. So, okay, with this last field of exploring consciousness through the material lens, we end up the question of what really is materialism. But now we go into asking a more important question, and that is, why would I even take the material approach? Why should I believe that material is somehow better than the conscious experience? Why should I not put the mind above the material? Why should I not put mind above matter? But why should I put matter above mind? And well, I tried to think of some most reasonable approaches, but it's very hard to defute the approach of idealism. Let's try and look at this together. So, what I first figured out would be important is to have talk about the evidence of material preceding mind. There's clear evidence of the fact that material has been here before the mind. I chose the example, but there's many other ways of doing it. You could maybe do like a geological approach, all kinds of different approaches. But what I thought of doing is this approach. There's three different calculations, and all of them show us that the universe has not only been here before us. Okay, sure, that could be true, but they're all pointing to a very similar number. 13.8 billion years old. They're all pointing to the fact that the universe is exactly this old. Now, why is this important? Why is it important that three different calculations point to the same number? Well, I think there's a very important argument called last Thursdayism. It's saying that what if none of this really happened and the universe was made last Thursday? It only seems that it was there before us. Yeah, sure, there's this kind of simulated environment of it there being before us, but we cannot really confirm that. Now, the whole theory with the Big Bang, it assumes that since the galaxies are moving away, then eventually, if we run the clock back, they would go closer and closer and closer, and that would be the beginning of everything. But that's saying if we believe that they were always moving away. And this approach can say that last Thursdayism can say that no, that's not the case. We just spawned into a point where the galaxies are now moving away, but it doesn't mean there was something before us. There was no simulation of the world before us. Now, the reason why I say that the three different calculations are proof that there would be something before us is that there's just so much fucking proof. And if only there was a theory of us thinking that there's something before us, okay, but there's literally visual proof. Let's try and go into it. So enough yapping. First of all, we started with the most important concept that can be disproved by an idealist approach. So the first approach to calculating how old the universe is the cosmic expansion. Now, in short, there's this guy, Edwin Hubble. He's watching the stars, he's watching the galaxies, he's looking through his telescope or whatever, and he's looking at the galaxies and he's just somehow noticed. Let's not try and get into the nitty gritty details of how it happens. He just notices, holy fuck, galaxies are moving away from us. And the further they are, the faster they move. Now, he's not actually the guy that came up with the Big Bang Theory, but what the Big Bang Theory is saying is that since the galaxies are moving away from us, if we kind of reverse this movie of the galaxies moving away from us, if we reverse and reverse and reverse, eventually it would all start from one point. Now, this guy, Edwin Hubble, he just notices the fact that galaxies are moving away from us, and he's like flabbergasted at the fact that this is happening. He's like, how is this possible? So he goes into some calculations. Now, let me give you some example just so you understand the detail of how the calculation of the beginning of the universe works. Imagine this scenario, right? Your dad went to get milk. He is now 3,000 kilometers away. Keep that number in mind. 3,000. And you know the speed of how fast he walked. He walked 3 kilometers per hour. Now, since you know both of these things, you know that your dad walked 3,000 kilometers and he walked 3 kilometers per hour. You just divide 3,000 by 3 and you get the number 1,000. So you know that he left you 1,000 hours ago. And now we have a similar equation or the cosmic expansion. Now, there's this thing called the Hubble's law, and it says that the movement, the velocity, speed of a galaxy moving can be counted by Hubble's constant times the distance. Now, how does this work? So, we know from the last example with the dad that you can calculate the time of how long ago something was put into motion by dividing distance by its speed. Now, in this case, the way that the speed of a galaxy is calculated is that you calculate with the Hubble's constant times its distance. The speed is directly tied to distance, since we said before that the speed a galaxy moves at is dependent on how far away it is from us. So, if we want to calculate the time of how long ago a galaxy started moving, it would be the distance, just like with the dad example, the 3,000 kilometers, divided by the speed of the object. And since the speed of the object is directly tied to the distance, we can cross out distance from the equation. So we know that it doesn't matter what the distance is, what it just matters is the Hubble's constant, and the distance is just like, it doesn't matter, right? No matter how far the galaxy is, you will always get to the same number. You just have to put in the Hubble's constant. Now, the Hubble's constant, the way it works is that there's this one space unit called megaparsec. Approximately, it's 32.6 trillion kilometers. It's this fucking space unit. It's huge as fuck, right? And the equations we have nowadays, thanks to them, we were able to figure out that now, when a galaxy is this 1 megaparsec away, it is moving from us exactly 70 kilometers per second. That's kind of a depressing fact when you really think about it, is that actively per second, a galaxy that is 1 megaparsec away, which is not that far away in the universe, right? Like it's moving that fast away. When you really do some calculations, 70 times 60, how much is that? 42? Yeah. So per hour, that's 4,200 kilometers moving away from us. No, wait, that's per minute. Per minute, 4,200 kilometers per minute moving away from us. Per hour, it's times 60 again. So that has to be like 2,000, like almost 2,000, no, 250,000 kilometers moving away from us per hour. So that's insane. I mean, now that you really think about it, per hour, a galaxy is moving away from us 250,000 kilometers. That's like the size of some country. So that's, when you really think about it, it's kind of fucking depressing. But thanks to this, we're able to. It's depressing in the fact that it really lowers our chances for space travel, since the longer it's going to take, the lesser chance we have of actually being able to get to some galaxy. It's going to be getting further and further away. But this is important in as is the fact that now we know that since the distance is out of the equation, we can just use the example of the galaxy being 1 megaparsec away. So we know that it's 32.6 trillion kilometers, and we just divide it by the 70 kilometers per second. So we do 32.6 trillion divided by 70. That's how the equation goes. And from that, we get the amount of seconds it's been moving away. So if we do this, we actually get the number of 440 quadrillion seconds, and that equates to 400 billion years. But the counter argument can be, okay, cool, yeah, sure. But just like with the dad example, remember, we said that our dad is 3,000 kilometers away. He moved at 3 kilometers per second. But a very rational argument could be, what if the dad stopped? He couldn't have just been moving all this day. But what if he just stopped? And what if he was already at this point and there's no such thing as the past? That's why we need the other equations to just kind of like be really sure with the number of 14 billion years. That's why I say this is the fact that there is one proof of the universe being exactly 14 billion years. It's not proving that anything existed before us, but the fact that there's three different calculations pointing to the same number using different techniques, I mean, that just makes it more concrete. Now, the other example, and I will not go into the math now, the cosmic expansion one is really simple to understand the math of. It's not some difficult math, but with these others, it's much more complicated. So, another example is the cosmic microwave background. So, how does this work? The way I understood it is that when the universe was made, it was all like plasma, and stuff, and light cannot travel through plasma. It's like if you're in a fog and you light up a battery of your phone, it like the light cannot travel all the way throughout the fog. Now, in the year 380,000, somehow scientists calculated that due to some like sound waves or whatever. Listen, let's not get into the nitty gritty details of this. What's really important is to understand that the way light travels is that it has the speed of light, and when you look into the space, you're actually able to see some old light. The light could have been traveling for some time, and we have been able to somehow calculate that there's this thing in the space. It's called a cosmic microwave background. It's because it's always in the very, very background of the space. It's sending light to us, and we have been able to calculate throughout different things by analyzing the waves of it, by analyzing what type of stuff it's made out of. It's like made out of 60% dark matter or something, by using some kind of equation of the wave being 1 degree, using some triangular fucking thing. I don't know. I like, this is a very difficult calculation. Anyways, it leads to the same number. That's what's important. The light traveling to us from the very, very furthest thing away in the space, it leads us to the same number. So that's another proof of, okay, this is getting weird. There genuinely is proof. We can literally see proof of something being there for so long, and we know how light works. So this is irrefutable. Next up, this is just like a bonus one, but just to say that there's another calculation that proves that the universe is 14 billion years old. It's the stellar evolution. Now we're able to measure the age of some stars. We're able to measure that, and we were actually able to measure that the youngest star is also approximately 14 billion years old. There's some like stellar physics that calculate this. Listen, we don't have to understand, because the math is out there. Just like with the cosmic expansion example, you saw that that is not some made up bullshit. I literally showed you the math. It's been proved that the galaxies are moving away from us per megaparsec, 70 kilometers per second. And if you just calculate the megaparsec divided by 70 kilometers, you get the amount of seconds, and it leads to 14 billion. Just like with these other examples, if you were to really get down to the math of how the youngest star is calculated, you would see it for yourself and get the number of 14 billion years. So this is not some like made up bullshit. This is some proof that there's multiple proof, and the light is still traveling us, and it must have been traveling for the 13.8 billion years. It wouldn't have been able to not do, like, it wouldn't have been able to do that, because it must have traveled all of that time with the way the light works. So yeah, that's the first proof of materialism, and why you should believe in it is that there's clear evidence of matter pre-existing, and there's even proof of the same calculations from different methods. Yes, that's the first proof. Now, second up, evidence of material affecting mind. Now, I don't know why among philosophers this is still being denied. It's like philosophers don't like, I think philosophers should be also fluent in other sciences, especially in neuroscience. And I chose this very old example of Phineas Cage. Now, there's multiple incidents nowadays, and we have much better maths and direct scientific proof and insights into how it works. But I chose the idea of Phineas Gage because it's a very popular example, and most of you probably know it, and it's very easy to imagine. So there was this one guy called Phineas Gage. He was working on a railroad, and he was putting some long ass rod into the ground, and there was gunpowder in it. And by him putting it into the ground, there was like a spark that lighted the gunpowder, and it flew into his cheek and up from his head. Somehow, my guy just survived this. It was completely okay, but a part of his brain was not okay. It was part of his prefrontal cortex, and even the doctor examining him afterwards saw, like, he couldn't believe that the doctor examining this guy, like, he couldn't believe the fact that a rod flew through his face up below his cheek, damaging his eye permanently and ridding him of part of his brain. The doctor couldn't believe that, but the story goes that this guy coughed and a part of his brain fell out, which must have been quite the sight to see. It was like quite a big part of his brain. It was like the size of like a cricket ball at least. So listen, this example, it has not been tracked that well. There's much better examples in neurobiology, but this was the first time when people thought there's something weird because this guy lost part of his brain, and then suddenly people were saying he was so well kept, he was such a gentle person, but after his incident, he became like a fucking douchebag. Like he became like an Alabama citizen. He was so stupid and just annoying and just like a redneck. It just became like a redneck, and people were like, this is strange that the mind is altered by matter. And another proof I could use of the second evidence, which goes that material affects mind, is how can you then say that material is not affecting the mind when you literally can go drink a beer and that affects your conscious state? You take some psychedelics and like this, there's clear proof of matter affecting the mind. Another very important incident is the Charles Whitman incident. In case you don't know, this is also super important. There was this one guy in the Navy. He then went completely crazy, shut up some people. But before he did that, he wrote a letter and he said that there's something wrong with my brain. After I die, examine my brain. And they actually did that, and he had a tumor in his brain, pushing some specific area. I'm not sure what it was. I'm not really that fond in the brain, but it was pushing this one specific area in his brain that made him like super scared, maybe. I don't know. But he wrote in the letter, there's something wrong with my brain. Take a look at it. I really want to kill people. I really, really want to kill people. He inevitably did. And this is just another proof of the material affecting your conscious state. Obviously, modern neurology knows much, much, much more. There's specific brain conditions, and you can always account some material effect that caused this brain condition. If you have schizophrenia, it's too much dopamine. If you have apophasia, it's the problem with the language centers in the brain. You might have heard of the split brain patients. There's this way the split brain patients' brains are cut apart. Now, basically, the way it works, you have the two hemispheres of the brain, and you have a thing called corpus callosum. It's the communicator of these two hemispheres. It's the way they communicate. Now, back when the split brain surgeries were still being done, there was this problem of people having epileptic fits when they were younger. And it was traveling all throughout the brain, all these electric signals that caused the fits of the epilepsy. They were intense epileptic fits. And doctors figured out that if they cut the corpus callosum, the connector of the communication of the two hemispheres, it would cut out the communication. Now, this also breaks the myth that one hemisphere is more language and other hemisphere is just pure abstract center. It's not really the truth, even though one hemisphere can be more used when you're thinking about some logical problem and analyzing something. Yeah, that's true. But the hemispheres are always communicating with each other all the time through this corpus callosum. Now, when the people cut the corpus callosum with these people with the epileptic fits, what actually happened was that you could see that clearly this material change was affecting the consciousness. They could not experience or clearly communicate what was happening in one specific field of view of their eyes. So you have the center that's not able to communicate. It's seeing a snowy scene because that's the way that eyes work. There's these connections going into the hemispheres of the brains, and you have these specific fields of the eyes. There's four of them, and if you show to this one a snowy scene, it goes into the hemisphere that's not able to communicate. Since it's not connected with the corpus callosum with the other hemisphere, it wasn't able to say anything. So the patient, he didn't know about it, right? He wasn't able to communicate about it. But then they showed to the hemisphere that's actually able to communicate a chicken claw. So to the hemisphere that's not able to communicate, a snowy scene, to the one that's able to communicate, a chicken claw. It was processed by the speaking brain, the left brain. And when the patient was asked to pick a matching object, he actually picked a shovel with his left hand, which is tied to the scene that saw the snowy scene, and his other hand picked the chicken, because obviously he saw the chicken claw. But then when he was asked about the shovel, he didn't know about the snowy scene, right? He said that he picked it because you need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop, even though his brain was picking it because it saw the snowy scene. There's a shit ton of videos about the split brain patients. It's fascinating, but I think it's big, 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 big proof of matter actually existing and actually affecting the mind. Next up, I have to shout out my classmate here. He knows how he helped me with this. What a fucking genius idea. I didn't even think about this. Occam's razor. Now listen, this is like the most ancient medieval ass example of some like guy who like we don't even have to give a fuck about nowadays. But the Occam's razor is actually quite goated. What William Ockham said is that listen, when we go into logical explanations of stuff, we should use kind of a razor, like to shave down the unnecessary stuff. When there are multiple explanations, why would we bring in external entities that are uncertain? We should use more simple explanations because at the end of the day, matter is all we know. So when you are home alone, your door opens out of nowhere. Yes, sure, you can bring in external possible entities of ghosts that have never been scientifically proven. But if you use the Occam's razor, you use what you know and you use the most simple explanation of it being the wind. The same goes for consciousness. There is no proof of anything immaterial. We have never been able to get into that. All we know is the material. So let's try and use the Occam's razor and let's not bring in external possible entities that are not even guaranteed. Let's just go with what we know. And this is a good approach, in my opinion. I'm all against metaphysics, and I think we should stay in this world right now. It makes too much sense. Lastly, the last reason why to believe in materialism is the fact that you see this all the time. Our cognitive processes are being replicated, and they're being replicated by matter. How is it possible that throughout matter, we're able to build something that replicates our cognitive processes? We're able to build a humanoid robot that acts like a human and it replicates its cognitive processes. How the fuck would that be possible if matter was an illusion? So those are all of my reasons why to believe in materialism. Don't worry, don't worry. I'm not trying to pick sides. I will give the proper treatment to other approaches as well. Lastly, if materialism is right, how does it affect us? Well, I think what's most important is the decline of spirituality and the rise of science. Because always throughout history, mind was this like magical and mysterious thing. And now we're just starting to figure out all of the processes behind them. We're exploring the brain more and more and more. And it's becoming less magical, less mysterious. It's more of a scientific matter. We're becoming more exact in our processes. We can better understand mind. And this seems like it's making life more boring. And sure, that's perfectly legitimate thing to say. I genuinely think that. But I think one huge thing is the fact that when there are people that are just like not good for society, we can better understand the defects they have, better understand, in quotes, evil people. We can see what's wrong with their brains. We can see what's different with their brains. Why are they not able to conform to society? And why is everyone else able to do it? Why are there serial killers? Why are there fucking pedophiles? I don't know, all of that. So we can better understand that. And instead of doing nothing, we can alter the mind and help these people. And if materialism is also right and we get down to the bottom of how exactly it works, we can artificially create consciousness. There's already, I've seen in some laboratories that they were given Doom. They made some like neurons or something. They had like neurons in something and they tied it to a computer that was playing Doom. And the neurons are now making new connections and learning how to play the Doom. That's fucking insane. Go look that up. That's very impressive. Genuinely, go look that up. Last up, this is the last slide of the presentation of how, if materialism is right, how it would affect our approach to consciousness and to life as a whole. I think that it would give us a different view of death. If materialism is right, then we are strictly bound to this world. Even if we reincarnate, we are still bound to this world. We will always reincarnate into this world, into a material world. If the matter equals mind, then if when there is no matter, it equals no mind, obviously. And it also means that death is not for us. Like it cannot be experienced by us because it's impossible. Like consciousness always finds itself in the experiencing state, and it is impossible for it to experience not experiencing. So death, like it's just it doesn't exist, and that gives you much more urgency, and it makes your own life much more valuable. There's no such thing as suicide. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. It's so fucking difficult to understand because I think even if materialism is right, I still believe in reincarnation, right? Consciousness is ever existing. How can it not exist? It's so strange and it's difficult to say. Maybe we are not just consciousness. We have this presumption of saying that we are consciousness, we are the experiencing experiencer of this body, but we don't know, right? That's it's so difficult. It's so difficult. So let me know in the comments what you think about materialism. Do you believe in it? And what reason do you have to not believe in it? Do you prefer idealism? Do you prefer substantial dualism? Thank you for watching. Subscribe because soon we will be taking a look into the other approaches and talking about how it affects us on death. This is a whole series on death. That is where it all started. But now we're figuring out that it all matters on what approach we're picking. That's what's important because depending on if we believe in substantial dualism or idealism or materialism, it completely changes what death means for us. And what's really important also to figure out is what even is us? What are we? Are we the consciousness? Are we the human? Are we just something we're not even able to name? Well, we'll see. So, see you in the next one, guys, and thank you for watching.